Good morning and welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour. Today we have a returning guest, Linda Downey, who we've had on before because she has great information about chronic health conditions. So Linda is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. She's also an integrative health practitioner and coach, a personal trainer. She has her master's in exercise physiology and a wealth of information. And so today, we're having her back on to talk about gut health and why it's important to do stool testing to look at your gut health and what it can tell about you. So I want to welcome Linda. Thank you for joining us again today. Really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Amy. Thanks. It's fun. When you say good morning, I'm like, oh, I forget that you're on the other side of the country because it's 2 o'clock here for me.
That's
But
right.
that's what's so fun about the technology, that we can connect like this and make it work. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, wonderful. So as we dive in, so we know a little bit about your background already, but how did you start getting into stool testing and what education and what path kind of led you to that?
Sure. So way back, I've always been a fitness and wellness person, right? I have a master's from back when I was in my 20s. So that's always been a passion, except I started to be a really sick wellness person. So I started to have a lot of health conditions, fatigue, my body hurt. I couldn't lose weight. I am a personal trainer. I was really doing that for full time for my living, and I couldn't lose weight myself. So all of those things were adding up. And so I had several autoimmune diagnoses that I've been on prescriptions for throughout my life. And at some point, I decided enough of this, and I'm going to go back to school because I like school. I'm like one of those ones that sits in the front row and raises their hand all the time. So I'm going back to school to learn about it. So I went back to school, and then I was like, oh my goodness, like what we're doing, what we're eating, how we're living can change this. Like I just thought, I got the bad straw and I had these autoimmune conditions, just my luck or something, right? But no, what I learned is you can make a huge impact on that and what you do, and gut is foundational to it, which we'll get into. But I thought, if that's so, then a lot of people, I mean, there's so many people in our country, as you know, which is, I'm sure, partly why you do this wellness hour, is that it's critical. We have a lot of unhealthy people, and it's not how we're meant to live. So as I worked on myself, I got better and better and better. But it wasn't until I actually did the stool testing for myself that I really exponentially, got hugely better. Like no turning back, no, because otherwise it was sometimes like this. Okay. So things would work for a while or whatever. So the gut, I learned, is a hugely important part. So now it's what I do automatically with my clients. We have to see what's going on in your gut because everything else comes from that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it's funny because I was just listening to a podcast the other day, it's a Rich Roll podcast, and you had a gastroenterologist on who was talking about gut health and the microbiome, and he had mentioned stool testing and stuff. And so I was very excited to have you on because he was talking about just how important your gut lining is to your overall health. It's like one of the most important things that we can do. And especially in the times that we're in right now, we're looking at ways to improve our immune system, to improve how we feel so we can fight off anything that might come our way. So this is a great topic. And so what I'd like to, if you don't mind just covering the basics of the digestive system first, so we kind of start on a level playing field, knowing where we're going.
Sure. And just so people understand, because when I first started to learn about this, I was like, how is the immune system in your gut? Like, is there a little house that has the immune system in your gut? Like, what? I don't get that. So this is how it helped me to understand it. If you think of from your mouth all the way down one continuous tube to the other end, the other opening. So there's 2 openings, and it's just like a garden hose, right? And that is, things can get in your body through those 2 ends, through those 2 openings, also through your nose, any of the openings, but those are the 2 main ways. So that whole hose, and then the lining of that hose is 1 cell thick. Only 1 cell between what's in the middle of that hose. So think of a garden hose and everything in the middle. That's the interface between the whole external environment and the inside of your body. And there's 1 cell thick of a wall that separates that. And it needs to be thin because that's where vitamins and nutrients go through, right? You don't want this big steel wall that vitamins and nutrients can't get through, but it needs to keep the bad things out. So not only is it, that thickness, but then there's a mucosal border. So it's just lined with mucus, right? Just like every opening that is exposed to the environment is lined with mucus, and the job of mucus is to protect and be a barrier. So that's why it's like 70 or 75% of our immune system really takes place in the gut. That's where a lot of things happen. So I'm going to show you a picture in just a second of, how we look at that. But what I would like people to think of is that there's several ways that the gut can be damaged, and therefore several places where we have to go to work to repair it. So there's the structural damage, right? There's that lining, that 1-cell thickness wall. Picture a brick wall out in your yard and it's getting, somebody's knocking a hole in it, the structure. Then there's the chemical environment of the immunoglobulins and the chemical compounds that your body makes that need to be in good balance. Then there's also the physical, the environment of what's living in that passageway of that hose. And that's the bacteria that live there, pathogens, parasites, all of those things. So we have to look at and repair and take care of all of those areas of your gut. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yay.
Yes.
Okay. So can I share with you a screen?
Absolutely.
Okay. So here is a picture. This is actually taken from Microbiome Labs, which is one of a few labs that I use when I do some diagnostic work with my clients. But I'll say this again at the end. For the month of August, Microbiome Labs is actually offering 20% off their stool test, which is the test we're about to walk through. And so it's, I don't know why they decided to do it for August, but they did. So I'm telling everybody, because I'm like, take advantage of getting the stool test, get this information. So here, this side is a healthy gut. And this is just what I talked about. Here's that 1-cell layer, right? That's the epithelial cell. So it's a hose, but then the lining of the hose has all these villi, all these folds, so that it increases the surface area for us to absorb nutrients, right? So it's not a straight line, it's all these holes. And then even there, these little fingers. Can you see this okay, Amy?
Absolutely. Yep. You can definitely see it.
Okay. So this is a healthy gut for a few reasons. Number one, the junctions, the connections between each of these cells are nice and tight. And so we want them to be big enough for vitamins and nutrients to get in, but no bigger than that. So we want these junctions. It's like having a really tightly knitted sweater. There's holes there, but you really can't see through it. This layer, that's a pretty blue color, is the mucus layer. That's the mucosal border.
And that's just outside that one layer thick of cells, correct?
It's protecting that layer. It's like it's making sure things don't get through to get to that layer. And then this lighter blue up here, this is where all the bacteria are. This is where stuff is coming through from one end to the other end and making its way through. But some of these guys, well, a lot of them will hang out and live there. And so the good bacteria have jobs to do. I think of them as like an army. So, or think of like a community of families, of like houses, right? So you've got the Jones house and the Smith house and the Allen house, and each house has a job to do that contributes to the community. So that's what these good bacteria do. So the Smiths might be in charge. Let's just use the analogy of the community, right? Maybe the Smiths are in charge of making sure the construction of everybody's houses is good. So they go around and they fix holes in people's houses. Maybe the Jones, their job is to make sure everybody's plumbing is working, and they go around to all the community, right? So the bacteria, each family of bacteria has jobs to do, and they live here.
And they're always outside that mucosal layer?
Well, they should be.
Should be. In the ideal situation.
An ideal situation. So over here is not an ideal situation. So what happens is when you get enough bad guys here, and that happens for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about, but eventually that mucosal border gets damaged. See how it's like it's been penetrated now. There's not all the way through. And it may be hard to read some of these, but it just shows by the different shapes, there's different bacteria, but you want in a healthy gut over here on the left, you want good diversity of bacteria, meaning you want a lot of different families represented. You don't want one or two families running the community, right? You want a lot of diversity. And you want a good ratio of good guys to bad guys. In every community, there might be like the south side of town or the bad end of town, but you want to make sure it stays in check. So same thing over here. You want good diversity. There's not good diversity. There's too many bad guys here, too many like bad bacteria. And so when that happens, it damages the mucosal border. And then look at this lining. First of all, it's red. That's inflammation. Just like when you get a cut on your skin, it becomes red and inflamed. This is red and inflamed because these pathogens and bad bacteria are bumping up against it. That shouldn't happen. The mucosa should be intact, but it's inflamed now. So that causes pain. People who have bloating, gas, pain after they eat, it leads to a lot of different health issues.
Okay.
That's inflammation. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just curious. Do we know why that mucosal layer degenerates to allow the bacteria to come in? Is it just too many bad bacteria? Is there something that eats away at the mucosal layer? Do we know? Yeah. Great
question. Antibiotics will damage the lining. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. I remember years ago how old was I? 30 years old. I had a personal training client and her husband was a GI doctor, a gastroenterologist. And I remember, back then I was a runner. I would go for a run and take Advil, right?
Ooh.
Pretty often. It was 30 years ago. I don't do it now.
Good.
He said, Advil is going to keep me in business. Advil is going to, not me, keep him in business. He would say, Advil is going to keep me in business because so many people are popping it and it's causing a lot of gut damage. That's what he said back then. And now we even are much more aware of that. But antibiotics, NSAID medications, processed foods. You eat food, it comes into this opening here, and was it out of the earth that God made, or was it out of a factory that man made, right? Is it made of chemicals or is it made of actual nutrients? And when it's chemicals, especially when those chemicals have been sprayed with glyphosate, right? Roundup.
Yep.
So if you're eating vegetables that have been sprayed with pesticides, if you're eating any processed foods that are chemicals, if you're eating meats that have a lot of hormones, and we're also given antibiotics. The other interesting thing that I think people don't give enough credence to is stress. Stress will actually break down this mucosal border and damage the lining of the gut for a variety of reasons. And stress elevates cortisol. The other thing that can be damaging to the gut is blood sugar, excessive blood sugar levels. So there's a lot of things like put those pieces in place with our current lifestyle in this culture.
Yeah.
Right. It's amazing. Actually, anybody has a decent gut, and probably most people don't. It's just to what degree are they feeling the effects, right?
Right. Yeah.
So when that mucosal border gets damaged, these guys now have access. This is all inflamed. And then look, there's big spaces between each cell. They should be nice and tight here, but they're not. That's leaky gut, which I think probably most of your audience, anybody who has health conditions these days has probably heard of leaky gut.
Yeah.
It's also called intestinal permeability. So it's you can permeate the lining of the intestine. That shouldn't happen, because now these things are leaking into the bloodstream. And now the immune system, that's where the immune system is being triggered. The immune system starts seeing all of these things in the bloodstream and going, hold on, this shouldn't be here. And the immune system is getting flagged. So you want to have a healthy immune system to fight a virus like COVID-19, but your immune system is so busy trying to handle this that it doesn't have the resources when something comes, down the pike that it needs to handle. That's one, current and important piece of information. Go ahead, sorry.
So what are some of the signs or symptoms that people would feel and that could lead to a diagnosis of a leaky gut?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to test. So as an FDN, we're taught test, don't guess, because you see a lot of that on the internet. My sister-in-law takes this, you should try it. Oh, so-and-so. Who knows if that supplement is right for you, right? We need to know what's going on. So I think testing is the best way, but there are some symptoms. If you have fatigue, if you get headaches, joint pain or muscle pain, obviously GI symptoms, any of the bloating, constipation or diarrhea, right? Either one, because it depends on what bacteria are there is going to determine which way that goes. One bacteria that can really set up camp here that I think over 60% of the population has is called H. pylori. Have you ever heard of that?
Yep, definitely heard of that one.
I had H. pylori. I didn't know it until I did the stool test. So I spent a lot of years, right, kind of doing this with my health. H. pylori is not a good one. It contributes to ulcers, gastritis. It contributes to stomach cancer, and it sets up camp here, and it absorbs your stomach acid, which then makes it harder to absorb your nutrients. So people become nutrient deficient. So their blood work shows they're deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, and they're taking these supplements, but they're not absorbing them because H. pylori has created an environment that is inhibiting them from absorbing those. So see how things fit into place. The other thing before we move on is when things are leaking through here, the other thing that leaks through here are the proteins of your food that you eat. So food is broken down into proteins. Gluten is the most famous one. That's one protein that's in wheat. Our bodies are made of proteins. You eat food that's made of proteins. Those proteins leak into here, and the bloodstream, they're now in the bloodstream, and the immune system says, hold on, that protein doesn't belong here. Now it's flagged, and so people become sensitive to the foods they're eating because the proteins of those foods are leaking in and flagging the immune system. And what's so interesting is gluten, the reason why that's such a big player is when you look at the molecular structure, it looks very similar to the proteins in our body, specifically the thyroid gland. So when people have autoimmune issues, their immune system is saying gluten is a problem, and every time it sees gluten, it goes on the attack. It attacks its own thyroid because it looks so similar in proteins.
Okay.
So that's a food sensitivities, and we can talk about that another time if you want. That's just, it's not only the bacteria that become a problem. Now the foods that you eat become a problem.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you back on to discuss that at some point, because that I know is a big issue for a lot of people, and I've had those issues before too.
Yep.
So now from here,
let me stop.
Where you go into the stool testing?
Yeah, I would love to go into the stool testing. Before I bring that up, let me just do a quick walkthrough of the digestive system. So obviously starts in your mouth, right? And chewing. And what I learned in my life, and I think a lot of people, chewing is super important, and I wasn't doing enough of it. So if you like eat on the run, you're eating while you're driving, you grab stuff as you're walking out the car, you're watching your kids' game and eating, you're responding to emails, right? All the things that we do. So we don't really notice. We just 3-4 chews, down it goes. Enzymes are produced in your mouth that are super important, and they're not produced anywhere else. They are only produced in your mouth. So you've got to chew and get those enzymes activated. Okay. Then we swallow down, it gets to the stomach, and the stomach has the acid that H. pylori likes to suck up, and the stomach churns, right? So it's got acid and it churns, and it does a better job of breaking the food down. Then the food goes to the small intestine. That's the next section. The small intestine's job is to take out the nutrients and the vitamins. That's where all the good things are pulled out. And then the last stop is, okay, we're done with the food. We've gotten everything we want out of it. It goes to the colon. And in the colon, that's where all this bacteria live, because the bacteria ferment the food, pack it up into poop, and send it out. Okay. Here's why that's important. Have you ever heard of SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth?
Yep, no, people have had it.
Yep. So SIBO means that the bacteria from the colon have so overgrown because there's not a good community there. There's not a good, checks and balances of bacteria. And the bad bacteria have now taken over, and they start to grow backwards up into the small intestine where they shouldn't be. Now that's going to block good food absorption. It's going to cause pain, and it's just not a good, obviously anybody who's had it knows, but that's what SIBO is. The bacteria that should be in the colon is working its way up because it's overgrown. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, good. All right, so do we want to look at a stool test?
Yes, let's do that. So right before you do that, so what do people do? So they come, they find out, okay, I want to check out, see if I have leaky gut. I need to do a stool test. So they say, I need to go to a website and order it, and it comes home. Is that kind of how the procedure goes, or how does it work?
So the stool test that we use, you can only get through a practitioner. I'm sure that there's probably on the internet, for $120, here's a stool test. You're not going to get the information. This is pretty advanced technology.
Yes.
Takes a few weeks to grow the bacteria to really see what bacteria are thriving in the sample. So I'll show you everything that it shows. But
can you walk them through the process, how they would do that with you or a practitioner?
Sure. And I do it with people who are not my clients. Definitely if people just are like, hey, I just want to know, I'll order a stool test and I'll do a consult when it comes in so that they can get the interpretation and the recommendations of the test. So I'm happy to do that. But you have to do, as I said, there's three different labs that I'll use, but this microbiome is really one of the best, and as I said, they're offering it on a discount today. Okay. So let me pull it up, and we can keep talking about that. Okay. So it's pages and pages, right?
Yeah.
It's going to give you. Let me see. I just want to make sure I have some notes to make sure I don't forget what I want to say to you guys. So it's going to look at your total index, and that's adding up all of these different components that they're looking at. And we want a good number would be above 30.
For your gut microbiome, okay.
Right. And so when it looks at diversity, remember I said you want a lot of different families participating in the community. So that's what this means. And if the alpha diversity is low, that tells us that there's been recent damage, like from antibiotics or recent exposure to environmental toxins or stress. So that those types of bacteria that fall into this category would be impacted that way. And then the beta diversity shows, how you compare to the rest of the population. And so it's always looking at comparative to healthy US, right? Because the US is where we live. I mean, or other, comparable countries, but because that's where similar medications, similar diet, all of that, right? So you want to compare apples to apples.
Mm-hmm.
It will show you, and we'll get down in the other pages, but it's going to show you pathogens. So like the Clostridium difficile, that's C. diff. If anybody's been in the hospital, we all have C. diff in our guts, but if it gets too high, that's when you have chronic diarrhea and it becomes a real problem. Or E. coli. These are pathogenic, meaning they're there, but if they get out of range, they can cause disease.
Okay.
So look at, this is just two samples. It's going to look at a lot of different pathogens. It's also going to look at these bacteria are good bacteria, and we want to have them in certain amounts, but it's important that they stay balanced. And I'll talk about some of these, like Akkermansia, that if you go back to the soldiers analogy that I started with before I went to the Smith-Jones community one, right? The soldier, think of an army with regiments, and each regiment has its job. Mm-hmm. Each regiment has a general. Akkermansia is one of the generals that actually tells other bacteria what to do. So the bacteria talk to the brain. You've heard of the gut is the second brain. That's a lot in the news these days, or the gut-brain connection. So the bacteria, what bacteria you have will talk to your brain, and it will affect your moods. If you have anxiety for no reason, depression, your neurotransmitters are affected. So that's a really important one that is often low in people. Okay, and then it will also show in this category. These are some other things like your vitamins, that you have your butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid, which is important. I'll go into those a little bit. So how we get into same information, just showing it graph wise. What I like about this lab is it tells you a lot. Like there's a lot of text that you can read, so you don't have to remember all this stuff.
Good. Like
recommendations here. Low resilience can indicate a risk for antibiotic resistant infections, meaning you've had maybe, damage from antibiotics and now your bacteria are off. And if you're on antibiotics again, you might be resistant. So avoid consuming foods that contain antibiotics, like meats and dairies that are not of good quality, etc., or drinking water, because unfortunately antibiotics are in our water supply.
That's interesting, because you never really think about, after you're on an antibiotic, you think about, getting a whole bunch of probiotics to help your gut again, but you don't think about restricting your foods that already have antibiotics. That's actually a really good point. If you're just coming over an illness where you've been on an antibiotic, maybe stay away from meats and dairies and the water that's polluted. That's fascinating.
Or at least conventionally raised. If you do grass-fed, organic, and look at the packaging, you can do that. But if our conventional meat system industry in this country is terrible.
Yeah.
So okay. So now here we go in the phylum category. So phylum is Greek, I think, the Greek word for family, which is why I switched to, I used to think of this as armies, but I think of it as families. So these are the different families. Like if you were to look out at your Thanksgiving table, all the different families represented, right? And so you want to have, this says a US healthy level, and then this is the sample level here. So you want to have, like, let's just say, for example, this orange one, right? Actinobacteria. Right, this one's bigger. That says 7.47%. Healthy would be 4%, because this family of bacteria is related to things that cause illness. So you don't want it too elevated. Okay, so it's just showing. And then over here, you have all of the same families, and it'll show where that person, I was looking for a title there. It'll show where that person falls compared to where they should be. Like, so that's that person's number. So, and again, this lab will explain stuff. The donut chart tells you this, the percentile chart tells you that. But what
Wonderful.
I think is most important for people to understand is how much these families of bacteria affect and determine their health. They
Right.
really do determine how well your day goes, how much time do you spend in pain, how often do you have headaches. A lot to do with what this looks like.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And also, it tells you if there's more of a prevalence of a bacteria, which you can then use to extrapolate what a person needs to do to change in terms of their diet and lifestyle, correct?
Absolutely. So when I do this, as I said, I also do the food sensitivities test. So we look at what they're sensitive to along with this, and then put that together for them to like, okay, now this is how I need to eat. But I'll show you as we go down, this test tells you, and they're not the only one. We also do food Zoomers test, but let's just say now, this is the first bacteria, Firmicutes, right? That was up in the pie chart. So it's saying, okay, here's the US ratio that you should have. Yours looks like this. So you have way too much Firmicutes, that's the gray one, compared to Bacteroides, because those two need to work together. Those are the two biggest families, all right? Tells you what that's good for. Now look over here. Recommendations, nutrition, consume more of these foods, reduce these foods. This is how your lifestyle can affect, and these are some supplements that could make a difference for you to change that balance. Isn't that fabulous?
Okay. That's wonderful. I mean, it's the whole plan for you. And I like how it gives so many different ideas for nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Because
some stuff you've never heard of, and some stuff is pretty easy.
yeah, exactly. Or, you have options if you don't like something. I'm curious too. So when it gives those nutrition recommendations, does it mean for raw or can it be cooked food? Does it matter?
It can be cooked. It can be
Okay.
cooked. What matters for heat is if you're actually taking a probiotic. Most probiotics that people get on the store, even a health food store, that's why they'll say the better ones to be refrigerated. That's not even necessarily the case, because once they get into your body, the temperature of your body as it goes down, and then that stomach acid kills them. We need them to get to the colon, right?
Okay.
So that's where heating probiotics or fermented foods, making sure you keep your fermented foods cold, because the fermented foods have the probiotics in them. But these other foods you can eat, you can cook them.
Okay. Okay.
Because it's just
Wonderful.
the breakdown of the food itself that feeds this bacteria. So for
Got it.
instance, when we look at Firmicutes and Bacteroides, Firmicutes, harmful strains from this family come from saturated fat. So when people have a diet high in saturated fat, it feeds this family, right? That's what they like to eat. So, this is the family that orders pizza. The Joneses next door, they're the ones that always order Chinese food, whatever, right? This family likes that kind of food. So if your diet is made up a lot of that kind of food, you're feeding them. So you want to take out the foods that feed what you want to reduce and add in the foods that feed what you want to grow. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
And just to connect it, this family, when you have an excess of it, Firmicutes, contributes to weight gain. So people who have trouble losing weight, we see that this bacteria is elevated. It also contributes to sleep. When it's balanced, people have better and more efficient sleep. When it's not, people have trouble sleeping. Also their moods. So right there, this one family affects those three things.
Wow.
Okay.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Please continue.
Okay. This family, the Bacteroides, contributes to iron homeostasis, keeping the balance of iron in your body. It also contributes to the digestion of non-glucose sugars and to the metabolism of folate. So they have very different jobs, right? But they need to be balanced. And that's just, that's the two biggest categories. But this lab will now look at each of these families. It will compare them, and it will tell you. I just want to make sure, because I think it's so interesting what some of these do. Let's see. This proteobacteria, which is the gray one here.
Yeah.
This also thrives on fat and sugar. So again, the biggest components of the American diet really are fat, sugar, and salt, right? Like, salt as an additive, but fat and sugar are really what so many people eat. And that this family has a lot of dysbiotic or bad bacteria in the family. So it's kind of like a family of black sheep. we want it there to some degree, but we don't want it to be too abundant, because there's a lot of bad guys. If that gets out of control, then you've got a lot of like bad bacteria taking over.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. So again, each one, it'll tell you, where it should be, what that bacteria is good for, and then how to look at this. This ratio can be improved by stopping cigarette smoking, limiting. I'm going to say stopping though, right? Like cigarette smoking and gut bacteria. Who makes that connection? Right? But spending time in nature, because this is part of reducing stress, right? So, being in nature, having good sleep habits, spending time outdoors with is super important.
Digging in a garden, I imagine.
Yep, which you and I both like to do.
Yep.
So, okay, now we're getting into the pathogens. It says, it's not a diagnostic test, meaning, they don't want to say they're giving you a diagnosis, but they can see a lot of different pathogens. So these are the bad guys, right? C. diff, E. coli, and it'll tell you now which probiotics you may want to make sure that you're taking. So this company, I use not only theirs, but I use a lot of their probiotics. And here's why. They come encased in a spore casing that protects them. They don't need to be refrigerated. And they will make it all the way through your body, and the spore doesn't open until it gets to the colon. So that bacteria are like, oh, okay, we're home. We know where we are. We're in the colon. That's where we should be. And then that spore casing leaves.
It's great, because I was just going to ask you, what do you do with probiotics then if you can't get them to your gut, if they get, dismantled beforehand? So that's how.
Yeah, there's certain companies, but again, these are not, it's not available in the store. You've got to order them through a practitioner, but that's why, because it's not stuff like that's going to sit on a shelf. And also they have a couple of different kinds. When you look at somebody's lab test, you want to look and see, oh, this person is low. We got to make sure we pick one that has a lot of this kind or a lot of that kind, right?
Yeah.
So these are the list of pathogens that this test will look at. So there's the H. pylori, the E. coli, salmonella. These are all different, infections that people could have. This is a parasite. I had this one as well.
Okay.
Viruses here, Epstein-Barr virus, it can detect.
Yeah.
Okay, and so Giardia, Candida, Klebsiella. Okay, these are all parasites and pathogens that it can detect. That would not, I'll tell you, I've had several clients that have had H. pylori, and one woman, she had blood tests and she had lots of scopes, colonoscopy, endoscopy, because she had trouble for years. They never saw the H. pylori, the blood test or the scopes.
Really? And she needed this test, and after they found it in this test, she was able to make a change in her diet. And
yep, we found it. She was like, they tested me for that in my blood test, and they said it was negative. And in my training, I've been taught that blood tests are not that accurate for H. pylori.
Okay.
And I actually just posted a video. We did a conversation of her success, and she noticed within the first month of us working together, she started to feel better after years and all those scopes and blood tests. But it just wasn't, it wasn't the right tools, to know what to do. Okay, so these are, again, just different types of, I can hardly read that. This is showing the breakdown and how things like carbohydrates ferment in one way, proteins ferment in another way, and then what are produced when things are fermenting in the gut.
Okay.
So it just, again, it'll tell you that. But now your butyrate is one of the short chain fatty acids. So here, butyrate is arguably the most important. So a short chain fatty acid, there's several of them, and they really come from carbohydrate breakdown.
Okay.
And they do a lot of things. Butyrate in particular scavenges ammonia, regulates the immune system, reduces oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is the stress at a cellular level, the damage at a cellular level from free radicals that are occurring in the body. And that enough oxidative stress can contribute to cancer, because cancer cells will find those free radicals and latch on. So butyrate is important. All the short chain fatty acids are important. Okay. But again, here's the foods, lifestyle, and supplements. So it just goes through, and it will go through each one. Each one of these is a short chain fatty acid, but it'll tell you, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, this is great.
Yeah. And it'll tell you, so each short chain fatty acid has its job. So it tells you each one what it's responsible for, where you fall, you know, your sample compared to normal, and what you need to do about it. Okay. Lactate. Okay. It's an intermediate of carbohydrate metabolism. You know, this is some of the chemistry. Believe me, chemistry makes me want to stick a fork in my eye. So it's not like, you know, people could be like, oh gosh, who cares? So, you know, you could focus over here on the right, you know, for those, for that information. But yeah, so I'm just trying to see the next section. Again, these are all just the different components, but this is what every single thing you put in your body has an impact. It's either helping or it's hurting, right? Every single thing, from a lollipop to a cigarette. So we think of cigarettes just as lungs, but it's actually hitting all the other stuff. But every single thing, from a lollipop to a meal to a drink, all is impacting, when it gets down there, the whole environment. It's a whole living community.
Yeah, and I heard that with this podcast with the gastroenterologist I was listening to. He said that your gut microbiome changes every 20 minutes. So you can have a whole new gut microbiome in a day. So you could actually make yourself feel great, which we know when we eat stuff, we either feel good or bad, or we have that high and then drop down. Yeah. So it sounds like you can change it very quickly. So you could make yourself much healthier, you know, just by taking these steps.
Yeah, yes. It's a little bit of a misnomer that, you know, you're going to make it. It can actually take months and months and months to really create a new microbiome, because you've got to get these colonies. They'll only last for a couple of days if they're not fed right.
Got it.
You know what I mean? They will die pretty quickly. So you've got to get these colonies in there, and you've got to get them supported by clearing out the bad ones, not feeding them, healing that inflammation, getting that mucosa there, because that's all about the living environment that supports them. And then those colonies, once you're doing that and you're giving them good food to live off of, yes, then they'll start to say, oh, I can live here. Let's set up camp. Let's call our cousins in, you know, and then the good bacteria, when they see a parasites can come in. People think we live in the US and, you know, you're not going to get a parasite. You can swim in a lake and get a parasite, right? Enters in both ends, right? So you can kiss your dog and get a parasite, or let your dog kiss you. Probably how I got mine. But anyway, that's happening all the time too. And so when, let's just say, a parasite comes in, the good bacteria recognize, holy cow, that guy's not supposed to be here, and they surround it, and they make sure that that parasite can't set up camp and create a family and lay eggs and be living in you for years. That's their job, but you've got to feed them and, you know, take care of the whole environment.
That's great.
Yeah. So interesting, I think. And it gets into histamines. Histamines can be produced in the gut, and they travel to different areas of the body where they induce unfavorable symptoms. So people who have histamine intolerance, it's a gut issue, right? So Have you heard of that, histamine intolerance?
I actually have. So, I mean, it's fascinating that it actually is related to your gut and you can do something about it.
Yep. Yeah, people think, I'm like I did with my autoimmune stuff. This is just what I'm born with. Whether histamine, the MTHFR gene,
Mm-hmm.
turning that gene on or shutting it off, you can do a lot by any gene expression, whether you're going to turn your genes on or shut them off based on what you're eating and how you keep your gut healthy. So,
Wow. Very neat.
makes you want to go collect your stool, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
I know. I know.
I know what I'm going to be doing next week.
I know. You know what? At first, it's like, oh, you're kidding me. But then it's like, you can do it in your own house. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing with the food sensitivity test that we'll talk about if you ever want to. But thanks to COVID,
Yeah.
and this is an amazing lab that does such an in-depth test too for that, because they look at the proteins and the peptides. But they developed a finger stick one, so you don't have to go get your blood drawn. Which
Okay.
so but I'm saying that because this too, the kit comes to your house.
Mm-hmm.
Day you're ready to do it, you go in, it gives you very specific instructions because you want to take a couple of samples from
Okay.
the stool. You don't want to just do one, because what if the bacteria just isn't happen to be in that exact spot?
Right.
So you do it, it tells you though, it shows you with instructions, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
picture. And then you put it in with a preservative in the vial and you mail it back. And it takes a few weeks, as I said, but so worth it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Let me see what else as we go down. Ammonia, it just looks at everything. Ammonia, methane, pathways of gut inflammation. This is the chemistry, right?
Right. And it's just giving you information on that before it then breaks it down
Yes.
into your components.
Yep. Yeah, the lab just likes to give you a lot of information. This section is on hormones and neurotransmitters.
Mm-hmm.
So what gut bacteria are contributing? Have you ever heard of GABA?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. So GABA is critical for sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
This whole section is on hormones and neurotransmitters, the sex hormones, estrogen, all the things for sleep and for moods are affected by these bacteria. So this talks about this. So if your GABA is low, what foods you need to eat, what supplements, and sleep is always a problem for people.
I feel like this is somewhat like a chessboard. You get all this information and then you have to make a strategic move based on all of it, on what you're going to eat, just to kind of weave your way through getting yourself better.
It's not like, oh my gosh, I've got to eat all of these. It might be like, wow, I never eat avocados. Okay, I'm going to add avocados in. I'm going to cabbage. Cabbage was something like when I was a kid, we had cabbage a lot. And then there was this period of my adult life where I never ate cabbage. Like in your 20s, who's eating cabbage, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Now I eat cabbage all the time. It's part of my regular diet. So it might just be, let me take 2 or 3 of these and add it in and start to do that. So my approach is not to have my clients be on supplements forever, but sometimes we need supplements to bridge those gaps, or if there was really damage done, you might just need that. But, while we start to figure all of this out. So yeah, these are the hormones and the neurotransmitters. Look, serotonin and melatonin. Mm-hmm. Melatonin, did you know that more melatonin is produced in your gut than in your pineal gland? People think the melatonin comes from the pineal gland, and it is produced in the pineal gland significantly, but a lot more is produced in the gut.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that. I knew the serotonin was mostly produced in the gut, and which really affects our mood.
Mm-hmm. And serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. Estrogen is a precursor to serotonin. Serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. So this tells like what bacteria are going to affect that. So what's so amazing about that is, they've done studies with autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, all of those conditions. You change a person's gut and diet and hugely improve behavior and symptoms and ability to tolerate medications.
It's incredible.
That's not my area. Like I do
Yeah.
autoimmune, but I learn about it. I'm always on practitioner calls, and I
Mhm.
know, and I've heard of amazing success stories for that. So yeah, so I mean, now this is going to talk about metabolism. So there's bacteria that contribute to people's ability to lose weight or not, which we mentioned before, that we call it obesity bacteria. So people make themselves wrong because they can't lose weight, right? They feel
Yep.
so invalidated, they try everything. But if you don't have the right tools in the toolbox, it's not going to work. So
Yeah.
yep, okay, indole production. I mean, we could, if you talk about each one of these all day, but sex
Yeah.
hormones. People are like, oh, my hormones, I'm premenopausal or I'm menopausal, my hormones are wacky. You can do a lot with your hormones by your gut.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, this is a good overview just to show what are the different possibilities
Mhm.
of how your gut affects these areas of your body.
Right. That's what I wanted people to see, to understand the connection. You may
Hmm.
not want to like really understand how to read the test. Like, who cares? Just tell me what to do, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. But and that's why you have to order this through a practitioner. They're not going to let anybody just order this, and you know what I mean? They want to know that you're going to get these results and understand what to do with them next.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. So these are all the vitamins. I'm just looking, we're almost to the end, I think. I just want to make sure
Hmm.
I show you all the different categories.
Right.
Um, Yeah. Oh, keystone species. So I brought that up, the generals that are in charge of different things. So these are the ones that are really important that you want to make sure are in a good range. And it just
Okay.
shows those different ones. I think there were like 7 or 8 of them it goes through. And then we should be pretty much to the bottom.
Yeah.
So did I go through that too quickly?
No, that was great. So, okay, so you get this test back. They work with you. We find out, okay, these are some of the foods you can start adding in, try to limit these foods. And then they have follow-up visits with you and say, okay, after a month of kind of changing the diet, do we then address more? What happens
So
after
each
that?
each person is in an individual scenario. I have clients that I work with for several months, and that's part of our several month plan. We
Mhm.
are these lab tests. There's people that will just, and it's really probably a financial decision, right?
Mhm.
I can't do that, but I can work. We'll do for a month. I want to work on just my gut for a month. That's a different level of commitment or investment. Or somebody who says, I can't really be your client, but I just want this information, and then I'll order the test and I will interpret the test and go over and make some recommendations. And then they can say, you know what, I do want to hire you for a month,
Mhm.
or whatever, or let me try this, and in a month or two, I'll get back to you and see what's next for me. I'll implement the things that we talk about. Like,
Right. There's a lot of options, it sounds like. So
yeah.
then, do you repeat this test after a certain amount of time?
Well, definitely, if any of those pathogens came up, H.
Mhm.
pylori or any of the parasites, we need to repeat so that we make sure we clear it, because you go
Okay.
through protocols to handle that, and you want to make sure it's handled. So then you want to do that. If that's not the case, then yes, you can. I would say, like, it doesn't need to be any time less than once a year, because you're
Mhm.
working on changing that. You don't need to be doing it over and over and over. But if
Right.
you're working on changing it, you should know by how your body feels that things are getting better. And I would
Yeah.
guarantee that if you're doing what you need to do, you will feel better. Um,
Mhm.
but if you want to just check, like, wow, am I really good? You could do it whenever you want.
Oh, that's wonderful. So now, as we wrap up, how can people reach you and get this process started?
Sure. So I don't know if there's a place, maybe you can put it. I probably
Um,
can. So
yeah.
my business page is Organic Health Journey, on Facebook, Organic Health Journey. I have a website, although I rarely go there. But there is a website also called organichealthjourney.com, but I wouldn't recommend that. Linda Downey, there's my name.
Yep.
There's on Facebook, because this is going on Facebook, right? So
Yep.
that's my personal page, but you can send me a message there, or my business page. Just send me a message and say, hey, I want my stool test. And as I mentioned, for the month of August, that exact test. So I also do other labs sometimes, but that test, and by the way, the other lab is also very thorough and gives the same information, but this test is on sale. Like, the lab is offering it for 20% off. So I think if you have a thought of at all, this would be the time to do it.
And they need to do that before the end of August, correct?
Yeah, as far as I got an email as a practitioner, hey, we're doing 20% off the Biome FX. If you letting all our practitioners know. So I'm guessing it ends at August 31st.
Okay, wonderful. And so they can reach out to you, send you a message through Facebook.
Sure.
Now, for those not on Facebook, because I do broadcast this to other channels,
okay,
is there an email address that they could reach you as well?
Absolutely. Organic Health Journey, just to be consistent, at gmail.com. Organic Health Journey at gmail.com.
Wonderful. That's perfect. So any last quick advice you want to give to people before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that all of the good things in the gut really get fed by carbohydrates, but not obviously bread and cake and cookies. Carbohydrates like squashes and zucchini and, all of the good vegetables. So, if you can just start to add some of those in, you'll start to be feeding your good bacteria if there was nothing else you could do. And then just limit, certainly conventionally raised meats, but limit your meats and sugar. We need them. I'm not an anti-animal protein person. I think animal protein is important. So I'm not saying that, but just limit that so that you can just get that bacteria, because it's really the carbohydrates that feed the good guys.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on again. We will have you on again to talk about food sensitivities in a little bit. But just thank you for coming in again, sharing so much knowledge with everyone. And people, please reach out to Linda, because she is a wealth of information. She's only shared little tidbits of what she knows on here today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's always fun.
You're welcome. So all of you guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your weekend. We will see you again next week, and have a great one. Bye.